Hello and welcome to the Unfiltered Experience with Tara and Louisa. We are two girls who speak the truth about the struggle of never feeling enough whilst growing up in a world of filters and comparison. Here we will have raw, relatable and authentic conversations to empower you on your path to self-development. Come with us on the journey of unlearning. Welcome back, unlearners, to the solo edition of the Unfiltered Experience. It is a different experience for me up here by myself now that Tara is starting the new chapter and the new journey of hers, which is motherhood and parenting and navigating those last final weeks of her pregnancy. We over here are going to keep things rolling as per normal. I will be running the podcast and having some guests on and also doing some solo episodes. So please feel free to email me in the show notes. We put our email in on every episode. So email us with some things that you want to hear from me or guests you might want me to try and approach, or send me any, we're going to do I keep saying we because I'm used to me and Tara being here, but I guess it is I now, but I'm just going to say we because we are a collective and we're unlearning together. So we'll go with that. But we are going to do a Q&A episode. So please send us through any questions you want to have answered by me, and hopefully you'll feature on that episode. So that'll be really cool. But today we're going to get into a topic which is I have a lot of unfortunately unfiltered experience on, and that is anxiety. And that is because ever since I was out of the womb, I have been an anxious person. I've come out in with a very similar nervous system, and that is one that has a lens for the worst case scenario, let's just say. In this episode, I'm going to go through some background stuff from what I've learned on my journey of dealing with anxiety, and also give you guys some key takeaways that can assist with managing anxiety day to day. I am not medicated for anxiety. I definitely tackle this issue with unmedicated tools, and if medication is your way of dealing with it, then that's awesome. But for me, because of my history, if you've listened to our episodes, medication isn't always the best route for me. So it's been about learning how to manage my nervous system and heal my nervous system, not to be so wired for the worst case scenario and that fear-based thinking. So that brings me nicely into the first tool that I like to use, and that is build awareness over where the anxieties come from. And that starts with understanding whether it is a mental obsession, a fear-based thinking anxiety, or whether it's a physical experience of anxiety. So obviously both can happen at the same time. I might have a mental anxiety, which is I'm anxious over something that is in my thoughts. So maybe I'm coming up with scenarios that I'm anxious about. Maybe I'm worrying about the future. Maybe I'm worrying about the past. There is a topic to the anxiety. There is something specific that is cultivating the feeling of anxiety. And then there's another type of anxiety which I experience, and that is physical anxiety without the mental obsession. So that is living in a physical state of anxiety. So having that warm buzzing feeling in my chest, having the jittery hands, feeling like I can't get my sentences out, maybe like a dry mouth, feeling like this feeling that there is something wrong, but when I think in my reality, what am I worried about? There's not necessarily something there. The physical anxiety can definitely snowball into a mental anxiety where I start to come up with things to be anxious about. However, when I feel anxious, it's really important to treat it from its core. So if I'm mentally anxious in the sense that I am feeling and fearful of something that could happen, if there is a fear-driven thought pattern that's going on that's creating anxiety, it's important for me to treat that with logical processing, because I guess for me, I know the number one tool is sort of talked about, it's to do meditation to deal with anxiety. I personally, when I am in obsession around something, when I feel fear, when I am having these looping thoughts, those thoughts only continue when I'm stopped and I'm in meditation. I need tools that pause my thinking that I can use in the moment that's going to create a new narrative in my thoughts rather than dealing with that physical anxiety first. Because for me, when I sit in that meditation, I'm just looping and scared, and I start thinking about the wrong thing. I might start off, quite present in the meditation, and then halfway through my thoughts start changing and I haven't even realized. Okay, so once I know if I'm dealing with a mental anxiety, I will try and treat that through some tasks that I'll go into. And then if it's a physical anxiety, I want to treat that from the physical core. So that's when meditation, breath work, running, exercise, walking, getting out of that physical state, letting that energy move. So when I'm anxious, we haven't really gone into this before, but I've read this book, Letting Go by David Hawkins, and he talks about sort of this scale of emotions and the vibration of those emotions. And anxiety and fear is, I think it's under anger, but it's above depression and apathy, which means it's quite motivating. So it's quite a motivating feeling. What is concerning for, anyone, and I've only had this once in my life, where that anxiety drops down a lower level into depression, where I don't want to get up in the morning. I'm too anxious to deal with the day. And for people that have medical conditions around that, I have so much empathy, because that is such a painful place to be. However, that is an important thing to acknowledge, that it can be a gift to have anxiety, even though it obviously doesn't feel like it. But when we're anxious and we're in fear, that feeling can be quite motivating to change. Whereas when we're in that depression, the motivation's gone. So it's important to act when we can, when we're in that experience. So let's get into the mental anxiety side of things. So I mentioned before that what I mean by mental anxiety is I'm having anxiety because of the pattern my thoughts are taking. So I'm having really anxious thoughts. I'm thinking about things that are creating a feeling of fear and anxiety. Tip, drink every time you hear the word anxiety in this episode. So when I'm experiencing fearful thoughts or anxious thoughts, a really, really good exercise that I often forget to use, but I'll take you guys through, is this Socratic thought processing sheet. If we're having anxious thoughts, it's a really great exercise to understand where that thought is coming from and really break it down and be conscious over it. Because what can happen is when we're thinking in an anxious way, is those thoughts just snowball and they multiply, and we go down this whole narrative and we create a story around what we think reality might be. And it's important to pull it back and understand that our thoughts aren't reality, they aren't facts, and let's understand and get some perspective about where they might be coming from. As you guys know, I have an anxious attachment when I navigate relationships. That's my fear-based setting. When I'm not feeling secure and I get triggered, I'll go into sort of a state of anxiety, a state of anxiety of being abandoned. So I have this core fear of abandonment, and then the anxiety creates narratives around that fear and picks out situations to be hyper vigilant over to protect that fear. And it's often nowhere near grounded in reality. So it's a lot of fun for me. With this sheet, it's called Socratic Questions. I wonder if I can put a download link in the show notes. I'm not sure. I can write them out in the show notes. And what you want to do is you want to get to a thought that needs to be questioned. And then we break down the thought through these questions. So what is the evidence for this thought and what's against it? And usually by the time I get to the third or the fourth question, I'm like, oh, that's right. I'm actually having this thought out of habit from my anxious attachment. And I gain awareness over the fact this is my nervous system and my trauma talking and not reality. And that in those moments is so important because it's so easy to forget that. But let me read you the sheet. What is the evidence for this thought and what's against it? Am I basing this thought on facts or on feelings? So is this thought grounded in the truth of what's happening in my life? Let's say my partner doesn't answer his phone for I don't know, on a night out or something. Am I having this thought based on the fact that he's cheating, or is it based on feeling? I feel fear, so that's creating the thought. I feel insecure, so I think, oh my God, he's out with other people. Am I creating this thought on facts or feelings, and 90% of the time it's a habitual way to feel and a habitual way to respond to situations that you might have trauma around in the past. Is this thought black and white when reality it is more complicated? Often we live in this state of black and white thinking, like he either loves me or he doesn't. He's either cheating or he's not, which really maybe he's just not calling me back because he's present with his friends. Like, we don't live in that gray area. We're not very good at coaching ourselves into those new perspectives in that middle ground because we're in our fight or flight. So our fight or flight is very final. It's very definitive. It sees a threat and that's it. And we want to protect ourselves against that threat. Whereas when we're living in that sort of rational front of our brain, the frontal cortex, we understand like consequential thinking. We can think things through. And this sheet's a really good trigger to like remind yourself of that gray area. Could I be misinterpreting the evidence? This is a great one. Am I making any assumptions? By the time I get to this question, if I'm having an anxious thought, I'm like, I am misinterpreting the evidence and I am making an assumption. So that's just like that's pretty standard. Am I reading a situation through my anxious lens? I love the acronym with fear, false evidence appearing real. And this question is perfect for that because it's like fear is false evidence appearing real. So I'm looking at the evidence of a situation and I'm making it appear like my own chosen reality or like my own narrative that I'm creating in my brain. Like I'm coming up with a scenario and I'm looking at the evidence and going, see, because that's evidence of my fear, but really it's about the core trauma and the core fear, and that's why you're having those thoughts. There is nothing more confronting than being with someone or being around people with a secure attachment and someone that hasn't had like cheating trauma or someone that hasn't had, toxic abuse in their life. You are confronted with the fact that it is a conditioned process to be fearful of the things that we've experienced in the past. So when you look at someone that hasn't experienced those things, it's like, wow, like you don't think like that. Like you don't have those automatic fear responses and threats to situations that I do or that you've experienced in your life. And I think that's why it's really important to like do the work and have compassion for yourself around the work that you're doing, because we all deserve the freedom from that stuff. And I think that's the nature. I mean, obviously bringing it back to like our relationship series and talking about toxic relationships, that is the consequence of being in toxic love. And it's also the consequence of dealing with like, some childhood trauma, because we can't get away with that pain that we've experienced. We relive that until we heal it. We re-feel it until we heal it. Okay, back to the questions. All right. Might other people have different interpretations of this same situation? What are they? Am I looking at all the evidence or what just supports my thought? So that's what I was talking about before. Could my thought be an exaggeration of what's true? Yes. Am I having this thought out of habit or do the facts support it? That's a good one. Did someone pass this thought or belief to me? If so, are they a reliable source? And that's always a really important question to ask. Like, where have I picked up these belief systems and were they a reliable source? Would I count on that person for my future and to dictate my future? No, well, I'm not going to let them ruin my present moment anymore, and I'm going to heal and do the work, which is so hard. But anyway, is my thought a likely scenario or is it the worst case scenario? And that is on anxious thoughts. My thinking is just, I don't know why or what, I sort of do, but my brain is able to think of the worst case scenario in any situation, especially when I'm dealing with something new. I really notice this, getting clean and getting in recovery, because I don't have anything anymore that buffers me from that anxious thought. And, I lived in Thailand when I was 19, and I can tell you right now, I was not anxious whatsoever that whole time because I was intoxicated for most of it. And going back to Thailand in my recovery with my partner, I was able to think of all of these false scenarios or worst case scenarios of how me and my partner would die, or how like things could go wrong, or even like on a flight, for example. Like I never used to be scared of flying, and now I'm like, oh my God, what was that turbulence? Like, what does that mean? And I have these really bad habits in my thinking where I'm preparing for the worst case scenario in every setting. Like if I'm on a boat, I'm like, okay, like I'm going to sit near a window so I can jump out the window if it goes down or whatever. And all those thoughts are coming from a dysregulated or irregulated nervous system. My nervous system needs to heal from being in a state of fight or flight. And the only way to do that is with consistent practice of tools that regulate me. So creating a morning routine that is regulating my nervous system even when moments that I don't need to. So I've used a lot of meditation over the course of the last 5.5 years. Starting my day with meditation is really beneficial. I've really gotten a bit lazy with it recently. Another great one is breath work, which I'll talk about later. But breathwork is probably like the number one tool that I have found that moves a feeling out of the body, like allows me to feel those suppressed feelings, process them and let them go. And I think that's a lot of what anxiety can come from as well, is those suppressed emotions that we didn't know were there. And so we're free feeling when something triggers our anxiety, we're feeling all the stuff we haven't felt before or that we've suppressed. And so we're like at this boiling point of anxiety because it's all coming up against this trigger. And a tool like breath work and doing regular breath work, and when I mean breath work, I'm talking like the overloading of oxygen in your body. So those Wim Hof type exercises, the reward of doing breathing exercises where you overload your body with oxygen is just incredible and has been such a great thing to do in the moment, but also do regularly because you're dealing with that suppressed emotion and you're getting that stuff out of your body quick smart. We've broken down that mental anxiety is that mental obsession over something that causes a feeling of anxiety. So you have anxious thoughts, fear-based thinking. The best way to treat that, I have found, is using something like that task, breaking down the logic behind the thought, having a logical processing sheet, speaking to a friend, getting someone else's perspective on the thought and the reality, and understanding that your reality isn't the only one and there can be multiple types of perspectives. Also, another exercise you can do is write down lots of different perspectives, like try and come up with the most amount of perspectives on this thought, and you get awareness over that gray area, like, oh, this could be a number of other things other than my worst case scenario thought. Journaling, writing out and just getting it all out of your body and out of your brain. Sometimes this for me can actually get me lost in the narrative. So it's awesome to get it out of your body if that really works for you and get that down on a piece of paper, but try not to go too deep into the story and convince yourself of that story you're telling yourself. Maybe it's just about coaching yourself in a letter as well. That's another one that can help. But journaling, if writing is your thing, get it out on a piece of paper. Now, I've mentioned this before, breath work. I feel like breath work, when you remember or you have the opportunity to do it in the moment, is such a great task. So doing breaths like and overloading your nervous system with that oxygen, that can really alleviate that physical side effect of the anxiety and allow you to feel more present and connected to your body, because often when we're anxious, we're really living in our heads. Now, when it is a physical anxiety, I recommend breath work for the mental and for the physical. So breath work, do it rain, hail or shine. So another thing with physical anxiety, like getting outside, changing the environment, going for a run, going for a walk, doing exercise, getting your body into your parasympathetic nervous system where, you know, you're like puffed out. And that I also find with physical anxiety, meditation can help. And like when you're present with the feeling and doing some Vipassana where you're observing the experience in your body. And then of course, like, I don't know if you guys experience this, but when you go into like a massage place or like a sort of like a spiritual shop that has crystals and they've got like incense going and you go in and you instantly feel calmer. I don't know if you guys have that experience, but I sometimes will try and like create that in my home. So putting on like incense, putting on relaxing music, trying to like change the energy in the room, or like getting some sage. If that's your thing, it's not everyone's thing, totally understand. And yeah, taking like magnesium glycinate is the bomb for physical anxiety, is incredible. And obviously taking that stuff regularly is also really important because you're sort of building this wall and this state of your nervous system is calm. Lastly, I wanted to talk about anticipation anxiety because I don't know if anyone else experiences this, but my biggest trigger with anxiety is anticipating things I've never done before. So when I'm going to like a new appointment or doing something new for the first time, the anxiety I feel can only be relieved by doing the thing that I'm anxious about. So if I'm public speaking, if I'm like, I remember going to like a therapist for the first time, I feel really anxious until I'm there and I'm doing it. Or like I did this 4-hour breathwork thing and I was terrified because I was like, how am I meant to breathe vigorously for 4 hours? And I was so nervous right up until once I was there, then I did it. That's the only thing that alleviated the anxiety. And then those things become a part of my comfort zone. It's really important to know that like our anxiety can keep us in our comfort zone. It can keep us small and stuck. And I love the book, like Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. Everyone that, you know, if you look up to someone or you look at someone that has the career you want or has the partner that you desire to have one day or has things in their life that you want to go after, like everyone got those things by feeling the fear and doing it anyway. Like no one is exempt from feeling that fear when they do something new for the first time. They just continue to practice facing those fears and facing that anxiety and acting anyway. And that's been my experience too. Like, you know, I feel anxious every time I public speak, not so much with the podcast because it's not to a live audience, but when I have done public speaking in the past, like that anxiety never has gone away for me in the last 5 years. Like it's never, it's just never really, I've never felt comfortable, but I know I can do it. And I have a trust within myself that I can show up for myself regardless of how I feel. And I think that's the lesson, is that regardless of how we feel, we can go after the things we need and the things that we want in life. And yeah, I really urge anyone that deals with that to feel that fear and do it anyway, literally, as the book title says. Anyway, we've come to the end of the episode. I hope this episode gave you some insight into your own anxiety and some tips and tricks. I know I didn't really say anything groundbreaking. Oh, actually, just before I finish, one thing I will say, which I know seems pretty obvious, but when I am anticipating something big, like there is a big thing on a certain day, and usually it's about a conversation I need to have that puts me out of my comfort zone. So like getting vulnerable or, getting vulnerable with someone or getting honest with someone or talking to people that I haven't spoken to before about something that's new, whatever it is, I will choose not to have coffee on that day. I bloody love coffee. Like I absolutely love it so much. It's like the morning ritual that I love, but I'm in no illusion that coffee also can bring on feelings of anxiety later in the day. And especially if I'm dealing with something in my life that already makes me anxious, like if I've had a coffee that morning, the energy behind that anxiety is so much more intense. So I know And on the days that I have something big that is causing me discomfort and anxiety, I'll set myself up for success and not have a coffee because I'll have enough anxiety in the afternoon or whenever I'm dealing with the thing that I'm doing. And I guess that's like self-care because it's doing something that I don't want to do for the benefit of my day and for the benefit of my feelings. And yeah, that is the end of the episode. We are at the end of the first solo episode, so I hope you guys enjoyed that. Thank you so much for listening and for staying on the unfiltered journey with me. I will see you guys next week. We have a really exciting and beautiful guest who is, just such an awesome human being to learn from. So I'm excited to introduce you guys to her, and I will see you in that episode.